The ceremony was held in the Garden of Echoes, a crystalline dome on the moon of Lyrian where the light of 3 suns refracted into a million dancing colors. It was the kind of wedding poets wrote about centuries later, the kind that commoners whispered about in the marketplaces of 100 worlds. I stood at the altar in my ceremonial whites, watching her walk down the aisle, and I still could not believe she had chosen me. Her name was Seraphine Valcourt. At least, that was the name she had given me when we met 3 years earlier at the governor's ball on Argentum Prime. She had arrived alone, wearing a simple silver dress that outshone every jewel in the room, and she had danced with me, a lowly trade negotiator with calloused hands and a minor noble's crest that had been fading for generations. She had laughed at my jokes, listened to my stories about shipping routes and tariff disputes, and looked at me as though I were the most fascinating man in the galaxy. I had fallen in love with her that night. The year that followed was a whirlwind. She was mysterious, evading questions about her family with a smile and a gentle redirection. She had credits, enough to live comfortably but no obvious source of income. When I pressed, she would say she had inherited a modest estate from a distant relative, and I, blinded by love and the sheer improbability of her affection, chose not to dig deeper. We traveled together. We laughed together. We built a life. When I proposed on the balcony of my ancestral home on Terra Nova, the one piece of real estate my family had not lost to debt and poor investment, she had cried. Real tears. I had seen them. And she had said yes. Now, as we exchanged vows beneath the tri-sunlight, I felt a joy so pure it was almost painful. The officiant, a stoic man from the Order of Eternal Bonds, pronounced us bound. Seraphine kissed me, soft, warm, full of promise, and the crowd of 200 guests erupted in applause. My mother wept into a handkerchief. My father, who had never approved of anything I'd done, gave me a rare, genuine nod. We retired to the honeymoon suite, a tower suite in the grand spire of Lyrian that overlooked the nebula known as the Veil of Stars. The room was vast, draped in silks from the Andromedan trade routes, with a bed large enough for 6 and a view that made gods jealous. Champagne chilled in a crystal decanter. Soft music played from hidden emitters. Seraphine stood by the window, her back to me, her wedding dress catching the distant starlight. She had removed her veil, and her hair fell in dark waves down her back. I approached her, my heart full to bursting. "Mrs. Voss," I said, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "I like the sound of that." She did not laugh. She did not lean into me as she always did. Her body was tense, coiled, her hands pressed flat against the transparent steel. "Kaelin," she said, and her voice was different, deeper, weighted with something that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "There is something I must tell you. I should have told you before the ceremony. I was a coward. I wanted one perfect day." I turned her gently to face me. Her eyes, which I had always thought were a simple hazel, were now glowing with a faint internal light, golden like embers beneath ash. "What is it?" I asked, a cold tendril of unease curling in my stomach. She took a breath. The air in the room seemed to thicken, to press against my ears. "My name is not Seraphine Valcourt. That identity was constructed for me by my protectors. My true name is Seraphine Alvarec of the House of Stars, last daughter of the Arinder dynasty. I am the rightful queen of the Andromedan Concord." I stared at her. I waited for the smile, the punchline, the admission that this was an elaborate wedding night joke. It did not come. Her face was grave, the golden light in her eyes intensifying. "The Arinder dynasty fell 20 years ago," I said slowly. "The coup. The massacre. They said every member of the royal family was executed. I remember watching the broadcast when I was a child. The palace in flames. The new chancellor declaring a republic. I was 4 years old," she said. "My mother, the queen, placed me in an escape pod with 3 loyal guards. They smuggled me to the outer colonies. I have been in hiding ever since, moving from world to world, shedding identities like a serpent sheds its skin. I have been a scholar, a merchant, a refugee. And then I met you." She stepped closer, her hand rising to cup my face. Her touch was the same, warm, familiar, but now it carried a tremor I had never felt before. "I fell in love with you, Kaelin. Not because you were useful, not because you had status or power. Because you were kind. Because you looked at me and saw a woman, not a throne. I thought I could leave it all behind. I thought I could be Seraphine Valcourt forever, live a quiet life with you in your ancestral home, grow old watching the sunsets on Terra Nova. But they have found me. Who? The Chancellor's agents. They have been hunting me for 2 decades. My protectors sent word 2 days ago. They are closing in. I am no longer safe, and by marrying me, neither are you. The room seemed to tilt. I pulled away from her, walking to the window, pressing my own hands against the cold glass. Below, the lights of Lyrian sparkled, oblivious. I thought of my mother's tears of joy. My father's nod. The life I had imagined. Children, quiet evenings, the slow rebuilding of my family's name. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. Because I love you, she said, and the words were raw, stripped of all pretense. And because I will not let you be taken unaware. They will come for me. They will try to use you to get to me. You deserve to know the truth so you can choose. Choose what? Whether to stay or to run. I will not blame you if you walk away. I will annul the marriage myself. I will disappear and you will be safe. You can go back to your life, to your trade negotiations, to the quiet future you dreamed of. I turned to face her. She stood in the center of the room, her wedding dress pooling around her feet like a fallen cloud, her eyes glowing with that impossible gold light. She looked like a queen. She looked like she had always been a queen, and I had been too blinded by love to see it. What happens if I stay? I asked. She smiled, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. Then you become the consort of a hunted queen. You will know fear. You will know flight. You will know what it is to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. But you will also know me. All of me. No more secrets. The days that followed were not the honeymoon I had imagined. We left Lyrian in the middle of the night, abandoning the suite, the champagne, the future we had planned. Seraphine's protectors, 3 grim-faced men and women who had raised her in the shadows, met us at a private spaceport with a ship that had more false registrations than I could count. We ran. For 6 months, we jumped from system to system, staying 1 step ahead of the Chancellor's hunters. I learned things about my wife I had never known. She spoke 7 languages fluently and could negotiate her way past any checkpoint. She could fight with a blade and a pistol, skills honed in 2 decades of survival. She could look at a star chart and predict where the patrols would be, where the gaps in the net would open. And she was still Seraphine. Still the woman who laughed at my jokes, who held my hand when the jumps got rough, who looked at me with love that was not diminished by the weight of her crown. I don't regret it, she said to me one night, on a ship drifting through the void between stars. Marrying you. Even if it brought them down on us. You are the only thing I have ever chosen for myself. I chose you too, I said. Every day. Even now. But the net was tightening. The Chancellor, a man named Darius Vex, had built his republic on the bones of Seraphine's family. He had ruled for 2 decades, growing rich on the plunder of the royal estates, crushing dissent with an iron fist. He could not afford for a true heir to survive. The legitimacy of his entire regime depended on the Arinder line being extinguished. The hunters found us on the mining world of Caris 9. We had been careless. A moment of weakness, a desire for fresh air and real food. They came at dawn, a squad of black-armored soldiers descending on the safe house. Seraphine's protectors fought and died to give us time. I pulled her through a service tunnel, my heart pounding, my hands slick with the blood of a woman who had given her life for my wife's. We emerged into a cargo bay. A ship was waiting, an old freighter, its engines already warming. But between us and the boarding ramp stood a man in a gray uniform, his face a mask of cold authority. Behind him, a dozen soldiers raised their rifles. Darius Vex himself. Princess Seraphine, he said, and the name was a mockery. Or should I say Seraphine Valcourt? I must admit, your performance as a trader's wife was almost convincing. Almost. She stepped forward, positioning herself between me and the rifles. I tried to pull her back, but she shook me off with a strength I had forgotten she possessed. You killed my family, she said, her voice low and steady. You burned my mother's palace. You hunted me across the galaxy for 20 years. And for what? To keep a throne you stole? Vex smiled. To keep order. The Arinders were weak. They let the Concord rot from within. I gave the people stability. I gave them prosperity. Your return would undo all of that. It would throw the galaxy into civil war. That is not your choice to make, she said. It is the choice of the strong, Vex replied. He raised a hand. The soldiers' rifles clicked in unison. Goodbye, princess. I lunged. It was stupid, suicidal, the act of a man who had nothing to offer but his own body. I threw myself in front of her, arms spread, and waited for the bullets. They never came. Instead, a sound filled the cargo bay, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in my bones. The soldiers staggered. Their rifles clattered to the ground. Vex himself stumbled back, his face contorted in confusion and rage. Seraphine walked past me, her wedding ring, the simple band I had given her, now blazing with golden light that spiraled up her arm, across her chest, until her entire body was incandescent. Her dress dissolved, replaced by armor of light, and on her brow appeared a crown, the crown of stars, the ancient symbol of Arinder authority. You forgot something, Chancellor, she said, and her voice echoed as though 1,000 voices spoke with her. The Arinder bloodline carries the gift, the power to command, the power to protect. My mother hid it within me before she died. She knew that one day I would need it. She raised her hand. Vex screamed. The soldiers fell to their knees. And in that moment I understood. She had not run from him because she was weak. She had run because she was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the gift to fully awaken. The Chancellor's fleet, in orbit above Carice 9, received a transmission that night. A transmission of a woman in armor of light, a crown upon her brow, standing over a kneeling tyrant. A transmission that went viral across every network in the Concord within hours. The war that followed was not the civil war Vex had feared. It was a revolution. Worlds that had suffered under his rule rose up. The army fractured. Within a year, Darius Vex was in chains, and Seraphine Alvarec of the House of Stars, last daughter of the Arinder dynasty, was crowned queen of the Andromedan Concord. I stood beside her at the coronation, not as a consort of convenience, but as her husband. The man who had thrown himself in front of rifles for her. The man who had loved her when she was no one, and loved her still now that she was a queen. Do you regret it? She asked me that night in the restored palace of her ancestors, the fires of the old regime finally extinguished. I looked at her, my wife, my queen, the woman who had revealed the truth on our wedding night and changed my life forever. Not for a single second, I said. And she kissed me beneath the stars of her ancestors, and we began the work of building a future together. Not the quiet future I had imagined, but something greater. Something worth fighting for. She was a queen, and I was her king.